Alright, so let's try doing a homing attack in Sonic Simple Worlds. Or Simple Sonic Worlds, whatever. Okay, so this might seem a little bit more complicated, but it's actually not that much. I mean, it is to a degree, but we're going to be doing this as simple as possible. First of all, what you need to do is that over here, we already have it, but you need to double click on empty space, and then you're going to have to search for the easing object. It's this one. If it doesn't show up, go into the manager, type easing, and it should show up. You can click install and it should work, and it should show up over here. In this case, we already have it. There's no setup that needs to be done with it. Don't worry about any of this. Right, but now what we also need to do is that we need to create a value holder. So we're gonna go over here, click all objects, go inactive, put it in here, and this object is gonna be our value holder for several things in relation to the homing attack. So here in the active, we're just gonna call it homing values. Right now, to make it different for everyone else, we're gonna go into the image editor, gonna zoom in, and let's color this one blue. Just cause we just want it to be colored something, just so it's different down here. Now over here in the AZ or the values thing, you're gonna go in alterable values and click several of those. Here we're gonna select, we're gonna double click and type homing counter. And I think that's pretty much it. Generally, I don't think we're going to be doing much more, but I think this is mostly it. So now we need another object, the same ones as this one. We're going to clone it, and we're going to have a new one. We're going to put it in here, and we're going to call it homing position. And now we're going to go over here, we're going to make it red. I'm going to tell you what we're going to do with this object soon enough, but first we need to make sure that the hotspot, it's the little eye icon, is in the center. So make sure it is in there. Generally it is. You can click this button or this button and you will center it. This is the general center of gravity of the object, which is, it's a thing. Right, so now you gotta make sure before you go into coding that almost every enemy that you have has, in the qualifiers tab, in the events tab, it's this one. There's the qualifiers. You're gonna click here. It's added. This button is gonna show up when we click in here. You're gonna make sure that it has the enemies tag, either that or targets. But we're gonna go with enemies, and you just click on add, and you add enemies, whatever it is. It should be somewhere. I guess because we already have it added, it doesn't show up in here. But those things don't mean anything. They mean absolutely nothing. They are absolutely meaningless. They are just like tags. They're tags that affect an object. And in this case, we're going to be using the enemy tag to know what are enemies. This is the most simple homing attack possible. I'm not even going to do anything too weird, but before I do that, I'm going to clone this object, and I'm going to make a homing target. Now I'm just going to go in here, click on new, and I'm going to go over here and do a little circle. Maybe another one just so it fills up a little bit more. This is gonna be the shittiest thing ever. There we go, that should be good enough. We need, again, to make sure that our object or hotspot is in the center, or whatever the center is in this case. Right, and when it comes to this object, we're gonna go over here in display options and select visible at the start. Maybe same with this one, but no, I'm just gonna leave it there for now. Right, so we're here going to right click, make a group. It's going to call the homing group. Alright, so over here we're going to create an always event, and over here we're going to go, and generally those objects like groups and whatnot, they show up over here. So that's very useful because essentially those groups are groups of actives. An active object is something that can be coded in Fusion. Generally most objects are actives, and those are the objects you're going to be working with. So if you want to make an enemy, this enemy has to be an active, or else this will not work. Generally, there's no other like objects that you could be using, but basically, we need to look for the enemy group, whatever that is. Actually, don't know where it is. There's a kind of a listing. You can use to find it. Oh, this is kind of a waste. Because this is fine enough, we might as well just use the targets group. I'll just go with that one then. So here we're going to go into count, and for, don't mind that, and for each object. And now we're going to type a name of any loop. So I'm just going to call this the target loop. It's just a name. This really is just a name, but basically we're doing something important here. So always, that means in every frame that the game happens, there is going to be an event, which is a loop that happens in every single object that has the target qualifier on it, or group, or whatever. So we're gonna go in here, we're gonna click on the target object, we're gonna go into loops, and on each object, we're just gonna click OK for now. We're gonna go over here, copy this, and paste this. So basically now this like checks if there is a loop happening in an object with target on it, then this event's gonna trigger, and then anything that you put in here is gonna be executed. So in this case, we're gonna add a new event. It's gonna be, we're gonna go over here, and then we're gonna have compare to general values. This is very neat because it's gonna allow us to do something interesting. So to go over here, this object, the player object, which is it's essentially like in the middle of the player. There's this sphere sensor, this big green one, which we're gonna use. We're gonna go in position, and then we can get a distance to a point, which is gonna be very good for us. And now we're gonna find the target, position, X coordinate, and now I can just copy this thing over here and put Y. Now we're comparing the distance between an object and this and the other one. So now we're gonna type lower than whatever distance that we want. Like, let's say we want around 32 pixels. It's actually quite low. Let's go with 120 and 28. Right. Now what we need to do is that we might want to do a value, and this value is gonna be I should have made this first, but should have programmed this first, but like, I'll just do it. So we're gonna set its variable value b, and I'm gonna rename it to closest so far, and this is gonna be a value that will determine the object that is closest so far to the camera. So you will be targeting the closest object. So let's set it to 999, and then, well, that's not set, so it's 128. Now instead of comparing this to 128, we're going to be comparing this to that object. Go over here, values, closest so far. So if it's lower than that, then that object is going to be our target. So let's do this. And now, okay, what was I gonna add again? Okay, I get it. So observable value set. Sorry if it's showing up over there. This one closest so far to the current distance. Now it's gonna, since it's looping through every object, it's gonna look. It's gonna, if the object is close to 128, then the closest so far is gonna become lower, and then it's going to be coming lower and lower and lower until it finds the closest enemy to this. And by the way, this is a loop that runs through the entire scene. So if you have 200 enemies, this is going to run 200 times at 60 times a second. That means it's gonna run 200 times 60 a second. So make sure that you don't add too many enemies. So now what we're gonna do is that we probably need another one. So we're gonna type plus X over here and plus Y. We're adding this new variables. No, kitty. Oh my god. I apologize for that. But now you're gonna be setting. Basically, what we're doing over here is that we're storing our X and Y positions to a value, and then we're going to remember them later. So we're just going to set this to 0 over here and Y over here. If you don't get this so far, it's fine. You might understand it later. now we need to make this position too. Let's just set it to anything. Oh, that's where enemy is. I completely missed it. But yeah, now you can just drag another object into it. But okay, so plus X into it, and then plus Y into Y. And it's funny because since we're running a loop on every object of this nature, every event that happens over here is an event related to this one object that we're running a loop on. So that's pretty good. Right, so after this is done, we can run an event where check for input, or check for an alterable value of input, and then we check for, let's go with action B pressed. Funny thing about action B pressed is that it's only equal to 1 at once, so it's only when you first press it. Right, so now we're gonna check if alterable value, we're gonna check if plus X isn't different than 0. Because if it is different than 0, then we have a target, because it's only going to be set to something after there's a target. And I gotta remember, people, code runs from top to bottom. So essentially the computer is going to read this and run everything. And there's a mistake in here. I should have put this in here. So all the values are set, and then it runs the loop, which runs this thing several times, and then this is being executed. This is run read from top to bottom all the time, 60 frames a second. Alright, so let's keep going. Now if pos X is different than 0, what we need to do is that we're going to set this object, set position, I want to set this position, select position to the player, and it's this one. This object really is just a sensor. I don't know exactly what it does, but you can use it for something. And now what I want to do is that I want to set, let me try that in doing this. Insert, I'm going to be setting home encounter to 1. Now I'm going to add a division here by inserting a comment. I'm just going to put it just in there. Right, so now that this is set from here and home encounter is equal to 1, I can add an event that checks if home encounter is greater than 1. Or in this case, we need to be greater or equal to 1. If it's greater than equal to 1, you can just click on any object, it's fine. You're gonna add 1 to itself, home encounter. And home encounter, since it's the first one, it automatically got set to it. Right. So now, since this is like that, we're gonna also go into the M and set the player's float X to this object, this X coordinate. And we're gonna be doing the same with float Y. We're gonna be setting this to Y. So essentially float Y is being set to the position. So basically we're setting the player's position to that object. And this is how you set the player's position, is by setting this. Since the player is it's pretty much an agglomeration of several sensors and sprites and whatnot, we set the player's position by something else. And there's also some other things involved in it, but that's the gist of it. Well, and there's some pretty big deal things too, but still. Right, now that this is done, what we're gonna do is that before this actually does that, and this event needs to be placed before it, we're gonna set if equal to 1, we're going to, hold on, okay, it needs to be equal to 2. Since it's over here, it needs to be afterwards, because it's gonna set those things, and then in the next frame, it's gonna check and it's gonna find that it's equal to 2. In this case, if it's greater than 1, it's 1, and then it was gonna be greater than 1, then it's gonna add 1, and then it will automatically be 2. So now we're going to go to the easing object, just to make this a little bit more fail-safe. In the case of the easing object works in different ways. We're gonna move object, and we're gonna move this object, and I'm gonna be doing an easy out, and we're gonna be using, it could be anything, it needs to be linear. And now we need to enter an X coordinate, and there are several windows that show up, and that's absolutely fine. So it needs to be position X, and now I'm going to copy it, enter, it's going to be the Y coordinate, set it to Y, and then in event loops. The funny thing is that the event loops thing is it's the amount of frames that it's going to be going towards this. So if it's 120, it's going to take 2 seconds to get there. But the thing is, it's a fixed value, so if we're close to the enemy, it's going to take a second to get to it, and if we're far away, it's going to take a second as well. So it's going to be faster or slower if we're close. So what we're going to do is that we're just going to click OK for now. I'm going to click copy this and just copy the old distance thing. We're going to go over here, just click enter until this shows up, and then we're going to type this, and then we're going to divide it by, let's say, 3. I really hope that this works. So essentially, we're setting the time that it takes to get there by the distance to the player to it, which is always lower depending on how close you are. So it's going to take less time if we're closer, and it's going to take more time if we're far away. This seems fair enough, right? So now we need to disable the homing attack if it takes too long to get to it. So let's just say that if the homing attack takes more than a second to get to the object, which is it's fairly a lot for something that is supposed to be fast, we're going to go over here, and I'm clicking on the bubble just because. So homing attacks counter to 0. And the other thing that we need to do is we need to set the player's action to something else while in it. So we're going to set the action to something like, I want it to be the spinning action. So let me go in here, adding object management, player control, actions. Now we can check out the enemy, the actions. So there's jump, crouching down, skidding, spin dash, rolling. That's what we want. We want action 6, rolling. So go over here, right click, and close all groups. It closes everything. And then I can get back in here and set the action to 6. Now we have this. We can set the action. We can keep it on 6, really. It's not really that big of a deal. But another thing that we might want to do is that we need to reset the player's X speed and Y speed. It's gonna be pretty weird generally, but it's what you get, really. We can't do much about it. In this case, it's actually better to set the Y speed. We go over here, values, and we have, where's Y acceleration? This is falling speed. Y acceleration, right? So we set it to Y acceleration -1 because Y acceleration is the force of gravity and it's always pulling the player down. So setting this value to 0 isn't going to do much. So we might as well set it to Y speed to reset it to Y acceleration -1, which is pushing it up once, because every frame Sonic gets pushed down a little bit. So even if we set Y speed to 0 here, it's not going to work. We need to push him up a little bit more too, at least to a degree. This might not work, but it's something. So over here, we can reset those two, and it resets the homing attack pretty much. Right, so now that this is done, we need to also find other ways to cancel the homing attack. Let me just hear the cancel. It's outside again. Let me put it in. I think I typed it wrong, but it doesn't matter. And move. Right, so there's another thing that we might take into consideration. When the sensors are hitting something, that probably means the homing attack has failed. So if it hits a wall, for example, it should fail. At least in most cases, because sometimes it might target an enemy that is outside of the player's range. So what we can do is that we can check certain sensors and see if they have hit a wall of some sort. One way is to either use the sensors or use something else. In this case, we're going to use the sensors. So if you go in values and check collision, right? Oh, I need to replace. Right click replace. So let's go values, compare, collision equal to 1. Now we can just copy this, and now we're just gonna do this just so we can get it. This isn't gonna mean much. And I don't think I ever used fixed value ever. Which is not a thing that I've been really using much. Have we gotten this one already? Okay, I can delete this. Now, this should work. Okay, so cutting back into it, I made kind of a terrible mistake. Basically, I was setting the position of this object to the group, which I've now replaced with enemies, just because we're targeting monitors as well. Which, it's fine, you can actually set monitors to the target group if you want to, but I just set it to enemies just because I was making this target this, which it was just targeting like a random enemy of group enemies. So I just made so this object is easing into position X and position Y, and then it does this whole thing. And instead of setting it to, oh boy, instead of setting it to this, I'm gonna setting it to divide it by 7 or something like that. It's a reasonably high volume. It always starts at a big volume. This is the debugger, which I use to debug the thing. I could explain it a bit more, but this is the gist of it. And now it works relatively. There are some problems so far, but we're going to be improving on those. So basically, it goes towards the enemy, but in this case, it's going to get stuck because there's not colliding with the enemy. So in this case, over here, what we can set is that we can set the minus Y speed to like -6 or something like that. So they actually bounce off the enemy. And in this case, it's comparing the collision with group enemies, which is every enemy. So now we can go over here and test it out. And for some reason, it's not working exactly. Probably because the enemy gets destroyed before this group gets active in any way. So one way that we can do is actually sort of move this group up. In a way, it should actually happen before the enemy interaction group. So we probably need to move it into special actions. Let's just put it in here. Alright, let's go. So now, press the button, and there's a working homing attack. It's very unpolished, it could have been much better, but regardless, it is what it is for now. We can still tweak it a little bit further if we want to. In this case, it could have killed the enemy for some reason. But this is a working homing attack script. The original one, to me, felt a bit too hard to comprehend. This one should be doable for us. We divide this value because we want a lower one. I'm not sure if it works. Depends on the way that the easing object works. It might be actually be clamping the value to 1. So it's never actually, you can never actually get it to go much faster than that. Oh no, actually it does work, so that's good. So one thing that I wanted to test was if we could do something else. Oh, there's another problem. It's a mistake I made. But essentially over here, we need to actually compare if homing is greater than this one. I probably also need to put this everywhere in relation to this. So if you want to do the object, the homing target, what we need to do is that we need to make this one invisible every time, but in every frame, if it detects there's an object close to us, it's just gonna make this object reappear visible, reappear and drag it into it, and then we set its position. In this case, you can set both of them to, I don't think we can particularly, so we're gonna have to set it independently. So position, set X coordinate to X, and then set Y coordinate. I need to redo it again. Position Y coordinate, and then I go back to Y. Well, this should work, this generally. But to stop the audio, this is like a function that works in a lot of Click Team Fusion games. You just press the Control S and it does that. And as you can see the target reticle into it. This isn't a foolproof thing. It's merely just an example. It could be polished further and to avoid glitches, for example. You probably need to make it a way to actually avoid using the homing attack when you're dying. So you're probably gonna have to check. Should probably do this here. In this case, we can actually go and check player, control, actions, common actions, and we check die. So what we can do is that we can force it to observable values, compare. If action is different than 9. So basically, if action is different than 9, and this always needs to be above there, let's put it over here just because it looks better, but it should be here, technically. Just put it in here, it's fine. Basically, it's just checking if action is different than 9, then none of this will execute. So if we're dying, none of this will actually execute. There's probably a lot more to it. There's a lot more things you can do with it, but this is pretty much it. I don't think I'm going to leave the source of this thing up. I'm going to leave it to you guys to actually figure out and be able to implement this. It's not too hard, and consider it an exercise. At the end of the day, you still have the homing attack that comes with the engine. And in this case, we can still actually execute the homing attack if we're not in the ground. So what we can do is that we need to check if ground is equal to 1 and 1 0. So only execute if ground is equal to 0. So this is pretty much it, guys. It actually took a lot longer than I thought it would, but it worked. So this is pretty much the whole group. It's not too big, but I hope you guys understood what it means. See you guys some other time.